happens and what do you do when the tool you're using with your client, you start to realize might not be the right fit or the best tool for this particular scenario?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we'll back up just slightly, just a little bit. The whole coaching profession uh, was modeled off of some of counseling, some of mentoring, some of NLP, some I forget what the term. It starts with an ERS, something like this. So coaching itself came from a a background where there weren't necessarily tools used, but you were focusing more on a client's. You're just going along with following the client and asking curious questions and trying to maintain a space of utter blankness and just being in curiosity. When I took coach training, to me, it felt a lot. It was loose. There wasn't. Coach Training EDU. We emphasize establishing an agenda before every course. That's not ubiquitous in the coaching field. Some coaching programs don't train people to establish agenda. Or agendas. Going to Latin already. This is ridiculous. Because what happens? Seriously, my daughter, she's 15. Both my daughters are taking Latin, and they ask me Latin questions, and so I've been thinking in Latin lately. Anyway, agendas. That's not a normal thing. I think it is more common. I think Coach Training EDU is having an impact in the field where there's a recognition that agendas are important to establish. The other thing too is a lot of the tools that we're using are influenced also by NLP, or neurolinguistic programming. NLP has more of a scripted, like this is where you start. This is the recipe, so to speak, of the step 1, step 2, step 3. NLP is extremely scripted. To me, NLP feels a lot more like Latin, where you have more rules. There are more structure to these sessions. What I found when I was working with students is having a little bit more structure, a little bit more tools is extremely useful, because young people don't necessarily have enough life experience, awareness experience to handle just coaching sessions where they're just being asked questions. So having these structures, having these tools are really useful, right, when you're working with younger people. What I found is that they're also useful when you're working with adults, but you don't need, as a coach, you don't need to hold them so tightly. And the way I view a tool is these tools are extremely useful as scaffolds of curiosity. Like they're like a radar screen that allows you to look at the geography. It's like a map of geography, and you can say, oh, this part of the map, there's nothing there. I'm curious, what's here? Like that to me is the proper perspective to use a coaching tool, knowing that the profession itself has come from this practice of just being in curiosity, right? And that's the main difference between positive psychology, counseling, and coaching, is that a coach, we can have these tools, we can use these tools, but we don't diagnose, we don't, recommend action steps like, this is what you need to, this is what you need to do. It's more just staying in curiosity. So when a coaching tool does break down, like perspectives or powerful relationships or even future self or inner critic, any of these things, I used to feel freaked out. I used to think, oh no, coaching isn't working. This is bad. This is not good. Like, I'd feel a sense of panic and think, oh no, like I'm not doing it right, or I'm a bad coach. Or even when I was leading classes and there was someone in the class saying, I just don't like this tool. I don't like this perspective. This isn't making sense to me. That panic I felt doesn't happen much anymore. When a tool doesn't work now, I've learned there's usually something bigger. There's usually a reason why it didn't work. And the reason why the tool didn't work is, exploring that is more valuable often than if the tool worked itself. That is a big deal to get to that perspective. It took me about 3 or 4 years to get there myself. But once I got there, and once, especially when I was training people, and I realized, wow, like if this isn't working, it's worth exploring. And as a coach, you can completely toss the tool and say, great, this tool isn't working. And that's okay. That's okay. We don't have to have everything that we try out as a coach work. And there's so much value if something doesn't work, you just toss it. And clients go, whoa, okay, you just tossed it. And they feel like you're respecting them, you're following them, you're not just trying to, just work the tool, the next steps. Like you're with your client. So if a tool doesn't work, I would embrace it and go back to that curiosity and try a different tool. Or just stay in curiosity. Why didn't this one work?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I know in class, when I'm talking to coaches too, I often will say, it depends for tips for pivoting, okay, you realize it doesn't work. You're in that, especially as a young coach, just like you said, you're in that initial like panic of what do I do? I always say there's a couple of different ways to approach that, which is one, you can tell if you told your client you were going to start a tool, it's completely okay to say to your client, hey, you know what? I'm realizing that this isn't working. I'd like to pivot in this direction. What do you think? Or, hey, it seems like this conversation would actually benefit more from this conversation than to follow this. How does that feel? But I also said too, like if you haven't introduced the tool, so I don't always introduce, even if I use even Inner Critic sometimes, I just go right into Inner Critic. I don't necessarily introduce it as a tool, which does make it easier to pivot away from if it's not working. So if I'm doing Inner Critic and then as I'm doing Inner Critic realize, oop, nope, I was wrong. This is definitely a perspectives issue or a limiting beliefs issue. I just pivot the questions to more of that timeline. So a lot of coaches ask in class, and me and other trainers, how do you make that transition feel seamless for your client? Do you point blank tell them I made a mistake or this isn't working the way I thought it was? Or do you just sort of slide into other questions?
Depends. You can do both. Either or is valid. Um, yeah, I mean, I think uh, oftentimes what I'll do is I will have a tool in mind and I won't necessarily tell my client I'm working from this concept. Like I might be just that concept might be operating in the background, right? I think that's the
Right.
most common thing. I am thinking about a couple coaches I've worked with, a couple trainers we've worked with, and different conversations that we've had in the past about coaching styles and how transparent do you operate as a coach and say, okay, let's set the agenda. Let's do the time model. Let's set the agenda. What's the topic, importance, measurement? I'll echo it. Like I've heard coaches be that transparent with clients where they are in the process. I like it. I think it works. It's not a, it's not a, it does not feel clunky. It feels in some ways really smooth. I think a lot of it depends on how your style how do you want to operate as a coach. Uh, I took a stand up comedy class 2016, and I went to Portland's Funniest Person competition. Did not make it out of the first round, but I had 6 minutes on the stage and material, and it was an amazing experience. I got this like it was one of the highlights of my life. And when I was in this class, I would have my little things, and I would give I named the jokes, and so I would say I would give the name of the joke, and then I would say the joke, like the topic of it. And my teacher, they're just like, this is hilarious. Like, what are you doing? Like, why? No, like stop. So I had to stop that. But it just came so much from the teaching element of being like, okay, now this is the next topic. This is the name of the thing I'm doing. Yeah, we just threw that out. Like, but it goes back to as a coach, you don't need to do that. You don't need to say, okay, now we're working perspectives, and then like let's do the perspective exercise. You don't need to. You can just go right into it, and it can be smooth in that way. Or you can do what I was doing when I was saying, okay, now my next joke is on parents eating ice cream with spoons in the freezer. Like whatever that was, you go with it, but you find your style as a coach.
Yeah, I think I love what you just said, actually, the find your style as a coach. I think that's like the key that I feel is something I try very hard to emphasize in class. You know, there's a lot of questions about, well, what do I do when this goes wrong? And well, what if I skip this step of the tool on accident? And what if this happens? And what if that happens? And I feel compelled to let folks know that, you know, we build tools with steps and lots of structure so that you can get started very easily as a coach. You know what to follow, you can have the tool in front of you, you know how to follow it. But the idea isn't that you're following that step-by-step rules for the rest of your coaching career. The idea is that as you get more comfortable in your coaching self, so to speak, that you develop a style that feels and looks good for you and serves the folks that you're working with. So, you know, it's very, very common for me and my coaching practice with writers to blend inner critic, limiting beliefs, and perspectives into one like mega tool without ever introducing a tool at all and just pulling questions from those tools. So I think it's important too, like, I love what you just said about building a style that as you get more comfortable in your skin, that you build into your structure, your style, and that style includes how you address certain things that come up in a session.